Hey, it is a huge honor for me to be in Glasgow, Scotland, and I am here with a dentist, Dr. Neil Taylor, who got out of dental school in 1991, practiced dentistry for 13 years, and then decided I'm going to become an attorney and defend dentists getting sued. So let me read your bio. Neil is qualified in dentistry, law, and a retired 5-year member of the Faculty of Advocates. Neil qualified as a dental surgeon in 1991 from the University of Glasgow. Whilst in practice as a general dentist practitioner for 13 years, Neil obtained a law degree in 2003 with an interest in pursuing a career in medico-legal, dental-legal work. Neil obtained a diploma in legal practice, and after a period as a solicitor, he embarked upon a 1-year DENTALTOWN course at the Faculty of Advocates. Neil called to the Scottish Bar as an advocate in 2007. Neil was instructed by insurance companies and solicitors in the Court of Session, High Court of Justiciary, Appeals Court, and Sheriff's Court on a regular basis, defending clients' interests. Neil is an excellent defender with an extremely high success rate. In order to provide a service to dentists in Scotland, Neil has resigned from the bar. With the unique qualifications that Neil has, he is an excellent defender, mediator, negotiator, and mitigator. Neil's main interests are fraud, negligence, professional misconduct, regulatory and statutory interpretation. Neil has unparalleled qualifications and experience in dental legal advice and assistance. Neil, thank you so much for being on my show.
Thank you. Pleasure.
The neat thing about you being on the show, and I want to talk about this, is lots of times when dentists get in trouble, they're not transparent about it. They don't get on Dentaltown and say, hey, I got in trouble and here's what happened to me. So it's kind of all in the underground. And then dentists get mad at me like, okay, so there was a dentist in Canada who had a hidden camera on his staff's bathroom.
Yeah.
And he was taking videos of them. One of the staff found out, and it made the local newspaper. So then I post that on Dentaltown, and of course all the dentists will say like, why would you post something that a dentist did bad? And I'm thinking, my thinking is, with 217,000 dentists, maybe some other idiot has a hidden camera in his bathroom, and you need to know that that's wrong. And if you get caught, look at what's going on with this dentist. So I really stopped posting all the stupid stuff that dentists do. Like there was a case last week in New York where a full trial went on a dentist killing his wife. But I don't post anymore because every time I do, people just go crazy.
Sure.
So I guess my question to you in that rant was, when a dentist gets in trouble, he's not going to tell all his friends. So no one really knows what dentists are doing to get in trouble. So why are dentists getting sued? Is it what are the what are you seeing out there?
Principally in the UK, we tend to follow the North Americans about 10 years afterwards in everything. And patients are more litigious now than they used to be. And they see it as an opportunity to either have a settlement, i.e. be paid money, or they see that to cause the dentist some difficulty. The dentist, when they're sued or there's a regulatory problem, will, as you say, they will very much go back into their shell and they will not discuss that with anybody. My role is to defend them from that accusation. But they are very insular when there is an incident, that they will not discuss that in open forum. And that's very much the case. Probably 99% of the dental population will not discuss their difficulties with their own profession.
Yeah, I raised 4 boys, so when they got an A on a test, they'd run home and say, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. And then if they failed the test, they just wadded up and throw it behind the bush on the way home. So I told it's just human behavior. So, but what they're probably wondering is, why are they getting sued? I mean, is it ortho implants? Is it,
what's the most common? The most common just now is aesthetic ortho.
Aesthetic ortho?
Aesthetic ortho. The dentists that are qualified that are not necessarily an orthodontist attend courses for what is aesthetic ortho, effectively derotation of anterior teeth and the like. The patient's expectation is almost so high that it's virtually unachievable to achieve what their outset was in their mind at the initial point in the treatment plan. The patient will attend, say, with a rotated upper lateral, and that's all they're interested in, is the rotation of that or the derotation of that, so that it sits in line. What's not explained is that this is not orthodontics, and nearly every case that I see, the patient after treatment and they wish to sue for damages will go to see an orthodontist, who invariably will say, you require fixed ortho, and this will cost X number of pounds. The patient then goes back to the aesthetic ortho practitioner and says, this is what it's going to cost to rectify the damage that
Do you
you've
think the
caused.
orthodontists are planting the seeds for this in the patient's head?
Not necessarily, no.
You don't
No,
think that?
I think it's all down to the level of expectation of the patient when they first attend.
So do you recommend that the patient signs a form before it says, look, you admit that you're already ugly and your teeth are crowded, and when we're done, you're still going to be ugly and your teeth aren't going to be perfect? Or what? How do you...
I'm a huge advocate for written consent. Written consent, effectively, they're consenting to treatment so they know all the risks that go along or are anent to this type of treatment.
And what percent of dentists do you think sign written consents before they do?
Hopefully, if they're my clients, 100%. In reality, the General Dental Council, the regulator for the UK, advocates that, or in their guidelines, that you need written consent for general anesthesia or for sedation, for obvious reasons. I advocate that you require written consent for all treatments, so anything from a simple amalgam up the way. It helps in defending litigation.
Do you have those written consents? I mean, are they available on your website, or do you sell them? Or
I don't sell them. My clients are always open to being sent them.
But I mean, are they on your website?
No.
What is your website? I'm on it right now. What is it?
It's a
Tailored Defense
Tailored Defense
Services.
Services.
.co.uk.
Yeah.
tailoreddefenseservices.co.uk. We have over 4,000 dentists from Great Britain on Dentaltown. Any chance maybe under legal you would go post your name and maybe some of those consent forms or
Yes, I mean the difficulty with consent forms is they require to be tailored necessarily to the individual practice.
right?
So, for example, practitioner A may require just a general consent form because they provide general dentistry. Practitioner B may be sinus grafts, implants, etc., and may have to actually include more on that. So you can only really give a generic pro forma consent form that thereafter the practitioner requires to amend to their current situation.
So, is most of this, there's some big brands out there. There's short-term orthodontics, there's PowerProx, there's Invisalign.
Sure.
Are these general dentists, or any of those brands seem to be more?
No, not necessarily, no.
But is it mostly those three?
And all of these systems will work. It's the level of expectation of the patient at the outset. If you communicate to your patient what it is at the end of the treatment, what is achievable, then necessarily they will not sue. And if they understand that is the final position that's hoped to be achieved, then that's fine. If it's in the patient's mind that something else is entirely different. So, for example, you might have a lingually inclined lower 5. That's not going to be treatable with aesthetic ortho because I might have to either extract a unit or I might have to expand an arch or whatever. The reality is this treatment will provide this outcome. And it's that part that's key. It's not any particular type of treatment, any particular type of product, because all of them will work to the degree that they're designed to work.
Does it concern you on some of these softwares that you see being sold where they're trying to help you sell a case, like what would happen? What would you look like if you did bleaching or bonding or veneers, and they take your picture, they run it through a computer program, and then they're all perfectly straight? But is that kind of a red flag to you that now this lady has a receipt and then she comes back after treatment and says, hey, here's what you showed me you'd look like?
Not necessarily. In order to obtain consent from the patient to start the treatment as such, you are necessarily looking at giving the patient as much information as necessary. And that includes the visual aid. If you were to give a patient something visual each time, that actually assists you with gaining their consent. If that consent is gained and they have that information before them, then they're less likely to sue you. It's those that have in their own mind not been consented to the treatment. And there's legislation here from 2015, Montgomery against Lancashire Health Board, where effectively you're looking at what is the material risk. Prior to 2015, or that judgment, you were looking at consent of a patient as being a two-way conversation between you and the patient in which you imparted the information. Now within the UK, you're looking at also identifying what the material risks are, but also in the mind of the patient. So what would the patient believe is a material risk with this treatment? And you need to know what that is. You're also now looking at, following Montgomery, is what's in the mind of the reasonable person who sat in the shoes of that patient, what they would consider to be the material risks. So what I consider to be the material risk with a procedure, let's say root canal, I might have a list of these are the particular outcomes of this. You might have to have the tooth extracted all the way through to this is a successful outcome. That might not be what the patient has as a material risk in their own mind, and that's what you need to gain consent, and visual aids are actually very, very helpful with that. Because patients generally don't understand root canal. They understand the concept, they have a tooth within their head, and it's painful, and it requires some type of treatment, but they don't necessarily understand root formation and what might be difficult. This might be a perforation and this tooth might be extracted. Generally, litigation arises from having not explained that to the patient at the outset and not the procedure itself. Because it's not negligent per se. Say there's a file fracture within a canal, that's not negligent because that happens. But if you haven't explained that to a patient, or you haven't given them a visual aid that there's a 60-degree curvature on this root, and there's likely that we could run into difficulties here, then they're more likely to sue you. They're less likely to sue you if you've explained that from the outset.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is that when the dentist doesn't tell them it even happened.
Yes, that's a different type of negligence. It is negligent not to inform the patient that an incident has occurred. If you put your hands up to an incident having occurred, we're using the example of file fracture there just because it's easy to identify in our own minds. If you have observed that and you do not inform the patient, then that in itself is negligent. It's the non-referral of the patient to an expert or a specialist in order to attempt to retrieve that file fracture. That's the negligence. And that actually quite often, because the dentists tend to practice more now defensively than they used to, for the fear of either litigation or referral to the regulator. A dentist will qualify predominantly and remain a dentist, let's say on average for 20-25 years. The majority of those dentists will practice defensively because they are scared of an outcome that may occur. Whereas if they're more open with their patients, litigation will be far less.
You know, the only few times I've ever broken a file and I said, okay, this tooth is jacked, there's nothing to do. And both times I just told that to the patient. Both times the man said, I told you to pull it. You were the one saying to save it.
Yeah.
I told you. It was like, I told you. And so just because you told them, you act bummed, they said, pull it. You know, so it's just, and then other dentists will say, let's sweep that under the rug. I'm not going to say anything.
Sure. Yeah, and 2 or 3 years later, something flares up, and that's when the problems occur.
So there's some people say that there's a certain demographic profile of who sues. A lot of people say it's far more women than men, and it's an older woman, 30 to 50, who has got some background in healthcare. Maybe she's a nurse, or her sister's a hygienist. Or do you see that more lawsuits are from women who have some connection to healthcare, or do you not see that?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
I, brutally honest, I've never actually analysed that, but I'm just trying to look at the cases that I've looked at over, say, the last 20 days, and I would imagine that that's 50% male, 50% female. and across all age groups. It's really a communication issue. It's the lack of communication leads to more litigation. If you're a good communicator, you are less likely to be sued.
And I mean, less likely to be divorced,
Sure.
less likely to have your staff walk out. I mean, just that's the biggest battle on the planet. And I mean,
Yeah.
being born, learning how to navigate with the other 7 billion talking monkeys.
Sure.
And
I mean, dentistry in isolation is a moving target. The jaws move, or the lower jaw moves. Things are going to happen. People are going to break teeth. It occurs. It's educating your patient prior to them suing you in damages so that they understand that this isn't an exact science. Things do occur. And I find myself when I'm drafting a response for a client to a patient, and I find myself almost saying that, but it ought to have been said prior to this point. The file fractured, and then I wish to say this was explained to you at the outset of treatment, but I don't know if that was, because the clinical notes don't say that all options and risks were explained to the patient prior to. But I would like to be able to draft that into the response letter.
Should we tell them that even a Bentley breaks down?
Absolutely.
Ha!
Not that I have one.
Nothing lasts forever. So you talked about the top lawsuits were short-term ortho. Is that the word you described? Short-term ortho?
Yeah, currently in my experience.
Yeah. What would be next?
Root canal, file fractures or perforations of roots. Very, very common. Patients will wish to complain because a high percentage of time, as you say, the tooth will be lost, will need to be extracted at that point, and that's the complaint. I now have no tooth. I now wish an implant. I now wish that to be restored to what it was prior. And I blame you because you perforated my root. So yes, it's the more invasive procedures that are the more litigious.
So a Bentley costs more than a Chevy.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Well, Bentley, we're in the UK. That's your
Yeah.
most expensive car, isn't it, Bentley? The point I'm trying to make is this. Don't you think it's kind of, I mean, if somebody paid, go to America where it would be Cadillac, Pontiac, Olds, Chevy. So Chevy, Pontiac, Olds, Buick, Cadillac. Well, you wouldn't say if I paid a Chevy to hold it to the standard of a Cadillac.
Yes.
So why is it in the UK if I'm on the NHS and they only pay me £100 for a root canal,
Yeah.
which is about $100 US, right? About.
Sure.
And then here's this endodontist grading my work, but he did it and he was private fee and he got paid $600.
Sure.
Can I really do if you only gave me $100 for the root canal?
Yeah.
Why am I supposed to make a Bentley and a Cadillac and a Mercedes Benz and have it graded by some endodontist in London? What would an endodontist and a private insurance endodontist in London get for a root canal?
Maybe £1,000 compared to £100 in the NHS.
Yeah, so how can you compare his root canal for £1,000 to this poor NHS dentist who only got 100? Point being, going to file breaking, if you're getting £1,000, you'd be using new files. You'd be, everything.
Yeah.
If you're getting $100, you'd probably be sterilizing and reusing your files.
No, you're not allowed to do that.
Well, yeah, because of mad cow disease.
Well, no, just as part of legislation, you're not allowed to reuse.
But that came after the mad cow disease, I think.
I actually can't remember when it came in.
When mad cow disease broke out. And by the way, technically, I'm not a mad cow. I'm fat, but I'm not mad. I'm just a fat cow. But yeah, after the mad cow disease in the UK, remember when they collected all the cows and burned them in a field? They passed those laws that you stick it in a body, you can't autoclave it and reuse it.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, no, the issue I think that you're trying to identify is why would the standard on the NHS be the same standard as the private? And the reality is the standard is what the standard is, irrespective of price.
But that's illogical. That doesn't make sense.
The patients are entitled to treatment on the NHS within the UK. That's the way that our model's been set and has been since the NHS was formed. They're entitled to be offered that treatment on the NHS. So if we're discussing root canal at £100, let's say, the patient must be informed that that is available on the NHS if that dentist is an NHS dentist. If they are a mixed dentist, they must offer on the NHS, but they can also offer that on a private scale. And it's all about communication and information for the patient, but the standard, the outcome of the root canal is not measured against price at all. The price is actually irrelevant.
But do you think that's logical?
Whether I think it's logical or not is I'm effectively just looking at
The law.
what's the law in this respect, what would be classified as negligent. Whether somebody paid £100 or £1,000 for the same root canal is not really relevant, because the patient's now suing damages.
That is just so.
It's very
crazy.
Very different to
Well,
the
if I
North
walked in the
American
store
law.
and there was $100 washing machine and
Sure.
$1,000 washing machine, there's no doubt the $1,000 washing machine would be better than the $100 one, because you get more money and resources. You can take more CE. You can take more time. You can place a rubber dam. You can buy all these digital. You can buy all this stuff when you're getting $1,000 a root canal. When you're getting $100 root
But
canal.
both washing machines are designed to wash clothing. So the outcome of a spin cycle or a washing cycle will be, as you anticipate, would be a clean cloth. So it's irrespective of what price you've paid. You may have just paid more for a model that performs the task more efficiently, or spends more time, or might be a deeper clean. But the item has been sold to you as a washing machine. And if it performs that task, then that's okay. The £1,000 washing machine is exactly the same. The person sues in damages on the basis that the washing machine didn't work.
Do you see more lawsuits coming out of NHS patients or private patients? Or is that
The private patients are larger sums in litigation as opposed to the NHS, mainly because the fees are larger. So, for example, if I pay £30,000 for a full mouth rehabilitation and somebody has to now go and rectify this, I'm looking for my £30,000 minimum in rectification. If I have a full mouth rehabilitation on the NHS that might be on prior approval and might cost, say, £2,000, then ultimately that rectification on the NHS is only going to cost £2,000. So it really depends on what type of treatment they've had and whether it was on the NHS or private. But certainly the lawsuits that go through on the private basis are of more value than the NHS ones.
And is the dentist mostly looking at a monetary fine, or do you see dentists like losing their license on these lawsuits?
It's both. Necessarily, the two are separate, that a civil action can be raised against a dentist by a patient, and that's ultimately a negligence claim, a damages claim, which is either defended or settled, or there's obviously a proof hearing. The regulatory is effectively what happens to a dentist on their own profession. So, for example, a patient may say, I'm not happy with this root canal. They have two options. The patients aren't really educated as to what those options are, but they can see, I wish to cause some difficulty, or I wish this person's professional reputation to be brought into question. That's a regulatory issue. Or I wish to claim in damages, I want funds to go and rectify this, and that's a civil action. The problem is the two become very much intertwined, in that you are always, as a defender, looking at what is the regulation in this. My role is to keep my client registered, as opposed to looking at what is the settlement in damages. And the two should be distinct, but they do overlap.
Is there any way I could sue myself to get my license taken away so I could retire?
No, don't think so. You just
I can't do that.
You just voluntarily remove yourself from the register.
You just voluntarily turn it. Okay, so you talked about short-term ortho. You talked about root canals. What's another category of lawsuits you see?
Really, a lot of them are poor communication, irrespective of whether it's root canal or it's routine fillings or whatever. People will sue in damages for almost any particular treatment that you could imagine. So anything from scale and polish, you've removed all the enamel from my teeth, all the way through to you've broken my jaw whilst extracting a lower 8.
And how would you're a dentist yourself, so you're you're a dentist, but what kind of grade would you give dentists in general as communicators? I mean, do you think dentists are great communicators? Or, I mean, some people say that the only reason we became dentists is because we didn't have enough personality to become an accountant.
Okay. As difficult. My company, Tailored Defence Services, in Scotland, looks after approximately 22 to 25% of all of the general dental practitioners in Scotland.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of practitioners, and they vary. Some are very, very good communicators, and some are very, very poor communicators. It's those that are poor communicators that are more likely to be sued in damages as opposed to the good communicators.
And there's been a lot of research on that. I've read from American physicians that they say that's the number one deal, that the physicians aren't explaining what's going on.
Yeah.
So
you will always come across, no matter how good a communicator you are, you will always come across a patient that will sue in damages, and you've done absolutely everything correctly. And these cases are defended ultimately, you would hope, successfully. But the general standard of whether they are good communicators is very difficult to say.
So everybody listening to you right now is alone.
Yes.
They're all by themselves, and they're all thinking, they're just thinking, I bet I'm the best communicator in the world, because they always got A's in math and physics and chemistry. Describe to them, give them some information on how they would know of a red flag that maybe they're not a great communicator, they are a great communicator. How could you describe to that person so they can kind of know, like, how does this person listen to you know if they're a good communicator or a bad communicator?
If the patient, if you are, let's say that you're in a consultation and you're sat at 90 degrees, we're sat very much kind of square on it because it's the sofa, no doubt, that's been provided for this. But if we're sat, say, at 90 degrees or face on, and my patient's looking away from me or is disinterested in what I'm saying, is I'm not communicating with them. If you make eye contact with the patient and then look away and then come back to that point, that's what you're looking for from a communication from your patient. Patients will tell you an awful lot when they first walk into the surgery. The big red flag is that I went to this other dentist and I wasn't happy. That's generally the biggest red flag you can have, because they are looking for you to rectify something that maybe doesn't require to be rectified. And that's always a red flag. Is I've been to 3 or 4 dentists previously and I don't like any of these dentures. Now the likelihood is you're not going to be able to make them a denture that's to their satisfaction. And these are the patients that are red flags. And it's knowing how to identify the patient in order to communicate with them. Just for example, children at the right height, whether they engage with you, older people. It's all down to explanation and communication with them. And a lot of dentists think that they're very, very good communicators, and in reality they're very, very good clinicians. They might be the best clinician in the UK. They might also be a very poor communicator. And the number of complaints that I read that includes now, I was not informed of this, or you didn't tell me this, or I didn't know this, or I would never have commenced this treatment had I known this is what the outcome was. And that's poor communication on the part of the dentist to explain to the patient what it was that we were looking to achieve from the outset.
So you recommend written...
I do, yes.
Written consents for which procedure? I mean, you're talking about cleaning, exams, what procedures? Just
I think
for a filling?
I think we're now at the stage where it should be written consent for everything. Now that's my opinion as to where we are. Currently, the guidelines from the General Dental Council for the UK is that you need to have written consent for sedation and or general anaesthesia, which most general dental practitioners won't be performing general anaesthesia, but some will be doing sedation. The problem arises is when you go into the General Dental Council's regulations, is that if they look back another 6 bullet points before that, is that the General Dental Council will point out that whilst it's important to have a signature on a page effectively, what it is the actual discussions and the notification of that is important. So you're looking to impart the information, but my view on that is that you are far better placed to defend a litigation on the basis of lack of informed consent or no consent at all if you have written consent to that treatment. I mean, this is actually more prevalent south of the border in England. I should also say that Taylor Defence Services now represents Scotland, but also represents England and Wales, so we are UK-wide, and it appears to be more prevalent in England, the consent issue, than it is in Scotland.
So, we're on both sides of the pond, and on Dentaltown we have 51 categories. One of them's anesthesia. And, you know, look at these threads. Another death, this time in Central Florida. I mean, it seems like every month in America, somebody dies from sedation by a general dentist in the office. I mean, it's just over and over and over. I mean, Texas alone has had a dozen in the last year.
Sure.
But a lot of people in America, they say, well, in the UK, they banned dentists from doing sedation.
No, they've banned general anesthesia.
Yeah, and general anesthesia would be what?
General anesthesia is a full general anesthesia.
But I mean, is that an intubation or an IV or?
Not necessarily. It could be by an IV induction or by inhalation. But effectively, I think I'm correct in saying in 1998 there was an incident in Edinburgh, and thereafter you were not allowed to perform general anesthesia in general practice. You can still perform general anesthesia within the hospital settings, but it's for those that are general dental practitioners. And at that point, the majority, I presume, switched from general anesthesia to performing sedation.
And what do you think? Did you follow these sedation deaths in America? I mean, do you ever?
Not necessarily.
You
no.
don't hear that?
Not that we have cases in the UK, but I tend to just follow my own cases. We're that busy that, you know, have enough to look at. But I'm aware of, obviously, the cases.
Well, I mean, I just wish the Americans and in the UK would spell out side by side exactly what the regulations are, because obviously when you start telling dentists that they need to police their own selves, they get mad at you.
Yeah.
But when a profession doesn't police itself, then it invites in a checks and balance, which is going to be the government.
Yeah.
And I really feel that the dentists don't rein in, especially pediatric deaths.
Sure.
Then the government's going to be knocking on our door in no time, like they did in general dentistry in the United Kingdom in 1998.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want is the Congress, you know, knocking on our door, and they might solve it in a way that nobody likes.
Nobody likes, no.
So my deal is to my 81% listener that are American homies is that you better rein in this deal. I mean, look at the threads on Dentaltown. Another one. This time in Central Florida. I mean, it's nonstop, and I don't see you guys doing anything about it. Sure. But if you don't do anything about it, I guarantee the Congress and the Senate and the President of the United States will do something about it.
They'll make up
the Justice Department will do something about it.
Some litigator will say enough's enough, yes.
Yeah, and no one cares. I mean, when you go to a funeral of a grandpa, almost no one even cries. But when it's a 2-year-old,
sure,
the place is just, the pain in that room is crazy.
Yeah.
You can't kill kids in dental offices.
I think
you can kill grandpa, might not even make the newspaper.
I think again we go back to what is communication now. Our risk of being sedated or being put under a general anesthesia is that you could die. It's the explanation of that at the outset of the treatment that's key, rather than the incident occurring and then somebody saying, well, I didn't realize that my wife or my husband or my father could die from this. And that's really the issue, is you have to educate the public rather than educating the dentist. It's the dentist's role to educate the patients that this is a possible outcome. The same as anything. If I were to go in for open heart surgery, in my mind, I know there's a risk I could die because that I'm a human being, and I understand if somebody cracks open my ribs and starts tinkering around with my heart, there's a possibility I could die. What we don't as human individuals, unless we are educated, is realize that if I have a general anesthesia or a sedation or an invasive operation, that I don't really understand, I could also still possibly die as well. And that's the key element, is communication from the dentist to the patient, educating them that these are possible outcomes for this treatment. And not to do so is the issue, rather than some litigator coming in and saying, yes, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But the rules are quite tight here on that. They're quite good, and everybody should really know them.
Now, when you got your law degree, do you still have a heart?
Yes.
Or is it gone now?
No, it's still there.
You know who I have come in my office and do all my sedation? Bill Cosby.
Okay.
And he's been doing this for 30 years. He's so good at it. And you got a lot of we're older.
Yes.
Podcasters are young.
Yes.
They're usually.
I had to have it explained to me.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Yeah. You had to have it explained to you. Yeah, and I had to have my 23-year-old son Ryan help me do it. I don't even know what Ryan does. But I want you to talk to, these are kids 30 and under, probably 10-20% of them are in dental school, and the rest of them are just out of 5 years. Give them a father-daughter, father-son talk about how to stay out of legal trouble.
The best way to stay out of legal trouble, whether you are a student, whether you're treating patients for the first time, or whether you've been in practice for a number of years, is always identify the problem patient as they arrive, but also communicate with that patient, let them know what the risks are, let them know what all their options are, and thereafter to treat them. And you generally will not run into difficulties if you do that. There will always be the odd case where something arises because incidents occur in dentistry, and I wouldn't overly concern myself with those. If you keep good records, and also you communicate with your patients and gain their consent and trust, you genuinely won't run into problems.
And another thing that I love about you and your reputation and everything is that when you are picking an attorney, I mean, you're a dentist. He's a dentist. I mean, a dentist attorney, that's so much smarter. I see the same thing in the dentists who get a general accountant.
Maybe did the right thing to leave dentistry to do law, but...
Well, I mean... Don't think of how much more information you know when you're going against another attorney.
I think what helps is that when my clients phone me, having a dental qualification when they're discussing issues of dentistry helps. But 99% of what I do is actually law. It's actually legally related. It's what is the issue in law here? Is this negligent? Is this not? What should we do with this case? Trying to analyze the complainer, the person that's put in the complaint, as to establish how to move forward. So 99% of what I do is law, and 1% is really the clinical issues.
So now,
but it does assist because you and I can discuss root canal because we know what root canal is. Whereas if I went to another lawyer, they're not going to understand what root canal is. It's just an understanding of the clinical issues and applying the law to that.
But I see the smartest dentist getting the most help picking a CPA who only does dentist versus you pick a CPA and you get done talking to him, he doesn't even understand dentistry, and his next client owns a restaurant, that owns a dairy farm, that owns a wheat farm, and you're clueless.
Yeah.
And then you switch to a CPA that says, I only do dentists, like Kane Waters in Dallas. I only do dentists. They're so much smarter.
It's an entirely different model in the UK to America, in that the dentists who qualify in the UK must be indemnified for their treatment. It's what you would call insurance.
Malpractice.
Yeah, malpractice insurance. This is actually quite an interesting topic because nearly every country in the world will have an American-style model, which is malpractice insurance. In the UK, you can have either malpractice insurance or be indemnified by a defense organization. The defense organization, this is not everybody, but is 90% are run by dentists. So the dentists have maybe a degree such as a master's philosophy, law and ethics, or a master's in law or healthcare or something. And these are the people that are necessarily your defenders. When I opened up TDS as a person with a dental qualification and a person with a legal qualification in order to answer as many of the questions as possible. In America, you have what's called professional liability insurance. I think it's probably labeled that. The TDS model follows that in that my clients have an actual insurance policy, whereas the practitioners who are members of defense organizations don't actually have a policy. They're members of an organization. And it's something that's massively misunderstood throughout the UK, is that the dentists, and probably with the patients also, is that the question arises is if you have a policy, that policy has four walls to it. You must comply with the policy rules in order to seek your indemnity. Is used against an insurance policy, but the reality is it's a guarantee on indemnity, as opposed to defense organizations where they say that that's more flexible. Now, a lot of people in the UK, and certainly when we started this in Scotland, given that there's 22 to 25% of all of the GDPs are now part of this model, which follows the American model, we imagined that within England and Wales that an awful lot of people will transfer, because you are receiving a contract with a solicitor for service provision, and you're also receiving a contract with an insurer for malpractice. And a lot of the dentists are not content with not having a guaranteed position or not knowing what that position is. And what I've found over the last 4 or 5 years is that none of the dentists, including myself when I was in practice, actually understand what it is that we buy in the UK. So, for example, if I were to go to Australia, I must purchase an insurance policy. If I'm a dentist in order to practice, if I go to the States, if I go to Canada, if I go to Germany, if I go to Spain, I must purchase an insurance policy in order to do that. In the UK, I have the option. I can either purchase a policy of insurance, which should guarantee against malpractice and damages. If somebody sues me for £100,000 in rectification costs, my policy will pay out £100,000 in rectification. Or I have the other option, which is to join a defence organisation as a member, where that membership entitles me to request indemnity. And my view is, and this is only my view at this stage, is that this might change, and that the UK may follow all of these other countries or territories in that respect, is that we will be effectively, we must purchase professional liability insurance as opposed to membership. Interestingly, historically, with members of organizations, is that they can also purchase a policy, but they prefer not to have a policy position. And I'm sure that some of the UK listeners will understand, but those that are in the States will automatically think, well, how's that even possible? How can I practice without professional liability insurance? It's our rule, but I think that it ought to be changed.
What I found the most confusing when I came to the UK is I was reading the clause in my paternity insurance that I'm not covered in the UK. Right? Can't figure that out. Yeah, they said, we don't cover you in the UK. And so let's leave clinical dentistry.
Sure.
We were talking about when dentists get sued, they're embarrassed. They keep it in the closet. They don't talk about, hey, I got sued for a broken file and a root canal. Didn't tell the patient. So I want to talk about this because I feel like this is a dark closet in dentistry that most everyone doesn't know what's going on. Besides clinical dentistry, are dentists getting sued or legal troubles? Do you have cases that don't involve clinical dentistry where the dentist is legally in trouble for other reasons? And what reasons would those be?
The dentist can run into every other problem you can imagine. The company TDS effectively provides malpractice indemnity or insurance for clinical aspects, but dentists run into all kinds of problems.
Like what other kinds of problems?
Well, they can, any kind of criminal charge that you can imagine.
My joke, the paternity.
Yeah, they run into all kinds of difficulties with legal aspects. They may have a Friday evening out where they've maybe had too many to drink, and they're detained in respect of a breach of the peace. Now that's actually quite I don't know what you would call that.
We call that a DUI,
a DUI.
driving under influence.
No, not driving. Just happened to be in the street.
Oh, you can't be drunk and disorderly.
Drunk and disorderly
conduct.
Okay.
Public intoxication.
Something
What's
like
that?
that. Yeah.
Intoxication.
Public intoxication, or
Yeah.
they actually call it just being Irish.
I'm sure we understand what that concept is.
Yeah. So drunk in public.
You might be shouting and swearing in the street at another member of the public. Now that have a massive effect on your registration.
It would,
Yes, absolutely, but it's got nothing to do with clinical dentistry.
right?
And these are the kind of issues that, you know.
What about substance abuse?
Yes, there are some. Yes,
Is that very common?
Not that people actually open up. In respect, they wouldn't actually phone me and say.
I just talked to a guy. I'm trying to get an article. About every 3 years, we like to do a substance abuse article in Dentaltown magazine, and he was telling me it's about 14% of American dentists during their career will go to inpatient treatment. Most of it for alcohol, about 85% alcohol, but
Yeah.
14 out of 100 will go to inpatient for 90 to 120 days once in their career. That's significant.
It's actually quite scary. It is significant. There are practitioners here with the same problems. Dentistry is a very, very difficult profession. Very, very difficult. It's very isolated. It's very lonely. It's you, the nurse that you've hired, or as your employee, who might tell you on a Monday morning how their weekend was. You might have a rapport with that nurse, and however many patients you see a day, maybe 20, 10, depending on whether you're private practice, or 30 on the NHS, if you're mixed, maybe 20. And that's all you see every day, so it's quite lonely. And the stress levels for the dentists are very, 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 very palpable. They are scared of what can happen to them at the regulator. They're qualified as dentists, they can't do anything else.
Especially for that level of income.
If you lose your registration in the UK as a dentist, predominantly there's very little else that you can do unless you've managed to establish yourself in some other type of business, or if you are in the business of dentistry, and that's what they're scared of. And yeah, I mean there are cases in the UK, as I imagine there are in the States as well. There is substance abuse. There is no denying that, because these cases do exist, and I have a genuine concern for the profession, that the professionals within that profession are practicing dentistry defensively because they are scared of what the outcome will be, and I think that's very sad.
Well, I do know that it's one thing when you work in a factory and lose your job,
Yeah.
or can work construction, or you work as a waiter or waitress, you can get another job, but the amount of money a dentist or a physician or lawyer is making,
Yeah.
they're not going to find that income
Well, it's
anywhere else.
If you look at any business, and I'm sure that the UK listeners would actually understand this, is that if you lose your registration, you are the principal earner within that surgery. There, you now have a problem. If I lose my registration as a solicitor, let's say, I don't really have a problem, because I have a business that I just bring in another solicitor. I'm the director of a company. I just import another solicitor. In dentistry, yes, you can bring in another associate, but you'll need to pay them at 50%, or whatever the sliding scale suggests on the current format. You automatically will go out of business because you've lost your registration. So the key to dentistry in the UK is actually remaining registered. And that's why they practice defensively, and that's what they're scared of. And I think it's very, very sad to see, and it's palpable in the younger generation, is that they're so concerned about their record keeping, they're so concerned about grading their x-rays. What's the justification for taking this x-ray? What's the grading? And it's not only because the government might be able to claw money back from you if you don't do that, it's what is the knock-on effect from that. I could either be sued in damages, well, okay, fine, well, Neil's my defender, or the company will pay out in settlement, whatever. But what would the regulator say to that? And they'll routinely come up with, here are 6 patients that you saw and you didn't grade your x-rays, or the medical histories weren't up to date, or you didn't identify caries in such a tooth, etc., etc. And the list is endless of the faults that can be identified when you look at somebody's clinical practice. But the dentists know themselves, or certainly 99% of them will know, is that everybody does that on the odd occasion. Somebody will miss a medical history not being updated, or somebody will miss not identifying caries. And the fear that runs in from the profession as to what will happen to them, as opposed to, well, actually, I missed some caries there, I maybe should be more observant next time. They have a genuine fear, I might lose my registration. And we're using quite benign cases there of maybe not identifying caries or something and the like, but people can lose their registration for a number of reasons, and that's why they're scared, and they have a genuine fear of the profession turning against them, and they're isolated and they're on their own. And I take numerous calls pretty much between 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock at night. My wife must think I'm absolutely crazy, but practitioners, clients will phone me, and they have a genuine concern. They're worried about what it is. The first thing I hear when a person's referred to the regulator is, will I lose my registration? That's the first thing they say. When I used to do high court work in the criminal world, the first thing that a person alleged of a crime was, am I getting bail? I.e., am I going to be back on the streets tonight, or am I going to be locked up for the next 3 months, let's say, prior to trial? The dentist, the first thing they say is, am I going to lose my registration? They then follow on to always, what will my family think? What will my friends think? And they have a genuine concern about that.
What will their family think of what? Getting sued for a broken file and a root canal?
No, from losing their registration. So a lot of the dentists in the UK...
Well, I can assure you your spouse will be gone. As soon as you're not bringing home that big money, you can count that they'll be on the first bus out of town.
Yeah. But no, they have a genuine concern about that, and it's something that I find myself dealing with on the phone pretty much every evening.
When the dentist loses their license and their big income, what percent of the time does the spouse just...
Oh, I don't know. You would need to ask a matrimonial lawyer on that one, but I'm sure there are cases of that.
Yeah.
But, no, I feel for
a criminal
them.
on the street is worried about going to jail.
Yes.
And a dentist is worried about losing their license.
Yes.
And what does their family and friends and peers think?
Yeah. If you're a law-abiding citizen, sorry to use the Gerard Butler movie there, but let's just say you're a law-abiding citizen and you run into a situation, there's an affray in the street and there's an assault or something, the initial reaction from that person who has no previous convictions will be, this is quite embarrassing, what will happen to me, and I'm quite scared. That's where the dentists are with their own profession, and that's where they are with their own lives in general, is they're quite scared as to what will happen to them, because this is not a regular occurrence. I'm looking at cases every day. They're looking at their one case in their whole profession, and that's the distinction, is that they have a genuine concern over their registration.
So you said dentists are calling you every day. If someone, you only practice in Scotland?
No, and England and Wales.
Scotland, England, and Wales. So what do you have against the Irish? You're not over there in Ireland?
Well, it's not part of the UK. It's quite topical just now.
Northern
Ireland, yes.
So do you represent Northern Ireland?
Yes.
So that's Belfast?
Yes.
If someone's listening to this, how do they get a hold of you?
They telephone or email me.
Can you give that to them? Or?
Yeah, sure. My telephone number is 07577 486 909, and my email address is Neil, Neil, at Taylor Defence Services. That's TaylorDefenceservices.com.
And one more time on the phone number.
07577 486 909.
So we're just about out of time. I'd love to get a lawyer's perspective. Since 81% of the shows in the United States, yesterday Scotland voted to pull out. The UK,
Yes.
England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland voted to pull out of the EU.
Yes.
The pound dropped 20% yesterday.
I think there was a slight rebound on that, but
Okay,
yes.
Unfortunately, the Americans, they only have two television news stations. It'll be CNN and Fox
Yes,
News.
yes.
They'll cover this in 1 minute, and the newspaper will cover it in 2 paragraphs because they go on to cover far more important stories like Kim Kardashian or Jennifer Lopez or.
Well, isn't that more important?
Yeah, or the divorce trial. Who's the fancy guy in Pirates of the Caribbean? Yeah, Johnny
Sure.
Depp will get this much coverage on his divorce.
Yeah.
And the EU will get this much coverage. But
We get e-news,
you get E-News.
so we can watch that as well, yeah.
So I'm sure the dentists out there would love to hear an intelligent dentist who's a lawyer. What do you make of that? Is it, do you care, not care? What do you think?
There's a number of issues that arise from the referendum. I think the first issue is who the Conservatives will now pick or nominate as their leader will be quite crucial in respect of the negotiations with the European Union as to what is the exit strategy for the UK and what packages are afforded. Necessarily, that is one issue. Scotland voted to remain in the majority. As part of the UK, I'm sure that your American listeners were aware that there was an independence referendum not so long ago, and Scotland voted to remain as part of the UK in the majority. That was a minor majority. The majority was obviously larger with the EU referendum. So the UK has voted to leave the European Union in the majority. The majority of Scottish people actually voted to remain in the European Union. Now, legislators, I understand, are piecing together, and no doubt that the Scottish National Party will piece together a second referendum. That will be an interesting vote to see how the Scottish people will vote on that. As far as legislation in dentistry goes, a number of the UK Acts of Parliament that the dentist must comply with in order to either be registered or performing certain tasks are actually already in place because they're part of UK law. So a European directive will maybe say in respect of, I don't know, data protection, you must do this, you must have locked cabinets or whatever and keys, and you can't have files lying around. We have an equivalent law in the UK as the Data Protection Act. So not necessarily there's going to be a vast difference for the world of dentistry. Financially, the dentists, as I understand, are a bit concerned as to what will happen. But my general view is that the UK will always be the UK and will always survive in whatever format it is. And so will dentistry. People will always have teeth and they will always require to be treated. Which law you need to apply is whatever the law is on that day. So I don't think it's a huge difficulty for dentistry. There are other elements that may cause difficulties for certain other professions, but certainly in dentistry, I don't see it as being a major difficulty.
When I'm lecturing around the United States, I hear dentists a lot of times in the seminar or at lunch or at the bar after the show.
Sure.
A lot of times they say flippant statement about the Europeans. And the minute they say it, you just realize they've never been here.
Sure.
And so they're going to hear it from a dentist who's a lawyer. A lot of dentists will say things, well, mercury amalgam, that was all banned in Europe.
Yeah.
Or they'll say, we know fluoridated water, that was banned in Europe. Yeah. So I'm talking to a dentist who's a lawyer. Was mercury amalgam banned in Europe?
No.
And yes, we'll talk about that. I mean, I don't even know what that means. It was banned in Europe.
The standard filling on the National Health Service in the UK is an amalgam filling.
And the same in Paris.
I would imagine so, yes, yeah. Absolutely. No. No, there's obviously been reports on that in respect of mercury vapor and the like, but no, it's not banned, no.
Yeah, and are people suing for mercury toxicity? I mean, are these...
let's...
no claims on mercury?
If there are, there's certainly no evidence to suggest that it's the cause.
So you haven't seen any claims that...
Certainly not in my experience. Yeah. There are claims out there where people will claim that has
maybe
occurred.
When they say it was banned in Europe, maybe they meant it was banned in Europa. That moon around, what was that, around Jupiter? Maybe they're talking about the moon around Jupiter. And the other thing you say is that fluoridated water was banned in Europe.
No.
So what would you say about that?
It's not banned.
Yeah. And you're a dentist and an attorney. And the other funny thing...
I mean, anyway. I can only give the advice, I suppose, as a lawyer in Scotland, but it's certainly not banned per se in the UK. No.
Yeah. But... And also, I don't even know what Europe means because I don't like the term Europe and I don't like the term United States of America because how do you compare Manhattan with Miami?
Sure.
Texas with San Francisco, Alaska with North Dakota. And when you go around Europe, how do you compare Greece to Germany or France to Italy? I mean, you know what I mean? So there's really not a Europe, you know. It's like that. There isn't even a mechanism to ban something Europe-wide.
Europe is the continent,
right?
The European legislators, if they wish to ban some legislation, comes out of Europe all the time. And it's actually quite important as far as the UK is concerned. Prior to the Brexit, the Britain's exit from Europe, is the European laws were applied predominantly under the directives of the European Council or the European Commission, at the discretion of each of the member states. So if the UK chooses not to apply something, which is why I suppose there were so many court cases in respect of which laws were being applied, there's a huge constitutional issue around of the whole of the European Union that does not necessarily apply in the States, where you have a number of different laws that are centralized within these different countries. And some of them are within dentistry as well.
And then I just want to ask you one cultural question I'm not sure of. Like when I was little, and I grew up in Kansas, and that was the Midwest. And whenever I hear some Yankee in New York talk about Ohio being the Midwest, I mean, when you're in Kansas, Ohio is the East. And I used to wonder as a little kid, how Ohio is not the Midwest. That's way out east. I get a feeling, I still can't put where Russia is. I mean, it seems like nobody considers that part of Europe.
I do.
You do?
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So you consider...
I mean, I suppose geographically you could consider it as part of Asia, but necessarily it's part of
But you consider Moscow and Putin part of Europe?
Yeah, I do. I mean, they're not part of the European Union,
right? But most of Russia is on Asia.
Most people look at the average guy on the street; they'll follow football, soccer,
yeah,
and Russia plays in the European Championship. So it's considered on that basis as how most people will view that immediately when they're asked the question.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you're looking at who is within the European Union, which is not the UK now as of last week or a couple of days ago, you're necessarily looking at those countries that are within the European Union. But there are other countries within Europe that are not part of the European Union.
But that soccer explains that, because
EU
would be politics.
I mean, I suppose to use an example, Switzerland is in Europe. It's quite central. They play the soccer in the European championships. It's not part of the European Union. And I think that the distinction, I suppose, with the United States is every state is part of the United States, whereas every country is not part of the European Union. It doesn't mean that they're not part of Europe. And I think that some people, and this might be a perception from the States, I don't know, is that because the UK has left the European Union, that they've left Europe. They haven't left Europe. Europe's still the continent, it still exists. The UK is part of Europe. They will still, in my opinion, still be able to trade freely within that, whether there are tariffs applied. There's a number for the politicians to play around with, but ultimately the UK is still part of Europe.
I love Europe so much more than America in so many ways. Number one, most downtowns in the United States are empty and barren, and everybody moved out to the suburbs.
Yeah, I mean, if we use an example, and I'm sure that a lot of the dentists that would listen to this podcast follow golf. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my wife is Canadian. Maybe I should say she's actually UK, but she lived in Canada and Toronto for 17, 18 years before she came back to Scotland. If you follow golf, I mean, you're looking at, say, the Ryder Cup is Europe against the States. The Europeans will still have those players that are from the UK, English players, Scottish players, depending on who's picked for the team, just necessarily because the UK has left the European Union does not necessarily mean that they're not part of Europe. So whoever's selected into the team will still come from these countries as well.
So in Europe, so many people live downtown. So the downtowns are just vibrant. They're the entire life of their own downtown. Whereas when you go downtown Phoenix, downtown most major cities, you know, no one wants to go hang out in downtown Phoenix or LA, you know, but you want to hang out in downtown London and Paris and all those cities. It's amazing. But I'll tell you what's another thing is Americans think they're sports fans. There's no sport fan in the world as crazy as a soccer player, which they call football and which you call soccer. But man, those football fans in London and Paris, they're at a whole different level than an American fan watching hockey or basketball or the NFL. Whole nother level.
I agree.
Oh
they're
God.
Very, very passionate.
Crazy passionate.
I mean, I should obviously classify that the majority are very, very good fans, but they are very, very keen on their particular individual sport. Yes.
Oh my God, yeah. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
But hey, thank you, Neil, so much for giving me
Thank you
and
very
my
much.
my homies a hour of your time. It was very informative. And every dentist around the world has got to be a better communicator.
Yes.
And talk about the pros and cons of this procedure, what can go wrong, and if something goes wrong, what you would do next. And just like with your marriage, your kids, your family, the dining room table, business, it's all about the people. And if you don't learn the people skills, God help you.
Thank you.
All right, Neil. Thanks,
Thank you.
buddy.
Pleasure.